There's a commercial on TV. You've probably seen it. Bank of commercial that's got Harris in it. You won't know who Harris is. Some of you will know who Harris is. And it starts out with someone on their back porch, and they open up their barbecue, and as they open up the barbecue, all of these acorns just start to flow out. And it's a bank commercial, so you can figure out that the message here is, if you invest with us, one little acorn is going to turn into many acorns. But obviously, the local squirrel has been very busy. And if it's not enough that it's filled up the barbecue, suddenly the garage door slides open and all of these acorns that have been stored in the garage flow out. And then Harris appears and tells you that if you invest with us, you'll have lots of acorns. Any of you have squirrels that are that industrious in your neighborhood? Somebody told me this week, do you want to guess how many acorns a squirrel collects in, I don't know, the year? I'm told it was like 5,000. I don't know if someone wants to do the math and divide 365 days by 5,000, but that's a lot of work. Is the squirrel an example of what Paul's writing to Timothy? Is the squirrel an example of someone who's content? Or is the squirrel an example of someone who just doesn't know when enough is enough? Have you ever followed a squirrel around when it's trying to do its squirrel thing? Probably, if you're following them around, it's probably because you wanted to shoo them off of your lawn so they're not digging up holes. This is what squirrels do, according to the squirrel scientists. Squirrels are really good at storing and remembering where they've buried their food. What's the term? It's caching, strategic caching. They'll sort of like map out on a yard different areas to store different things. Kind of like in your refrigerator, there's the section where you store the vegetables, and there's the section where you're going to store the cheese and what have you. Squirrels will do that, and it helps them to remember where to go in the winter. You know, they have this great sense of smell. They can smell through the snow and through a little bit of dirt. They also are really good at deception. So it's this deceptive burying, something like that, where they'll have the nut, they'll dig the hole, they'll pretend to drop it in, and then fill in the hole so that, I don't know, their squirrel buddies are watching. They won't then go up and dig up the nut and bring it somewhere else. That's a lot of work, but of course it's in the instincts of a squirrel to do that work. What are our instincts? Are we born with an instinct to never be content, that we've just always got to be working towards the next thing in order to survive? I think the evidence against that is we live in a society where we do have enough, and yet not an instinct, but I think just a bad habit has us just always wondering, what's the next thing? What can I accumulate so that, I don't know, so I'm satisfied, so I'm happy, so that I'm ahead of the next person? I mean, is the squirrel an example of Paul saying, this is how I want you to be, Timothy? Or is the squirrel an example of how this is how I don't want you to be, Timothy? Is the way that we live our lives an example of what Paul's telling Timothy? Be content. Know when you've had enough. Or are our lives an example of what Paul's pointing to with those who are just trapped in this pursuit of whether it's riches or status, whatever it is. Which is our lives? And so I'm just going to ponder today, look inside our hearts and ponder, which are we? So what is contentment? There's a number of ways of looking at it. Contentment means that you're satisfied with your lot in life. You're okay with where you've ended up. Now, with that definition, I'm sure so many of us can go, yeah, I'm content. We live in a part of the world where our lot in life is pretty good. But here's the thing that continually critiques our culture. When you go to other cultures that do not have it as well as we have, you see a whole bunch of contentment. You see a whole bunch of satisfaction over against our dissatisfaction. Contentment is being okay with your lot in life. Contentment is about being satisfied with what you've got. Satisfied with your glass being that full because it is enough. Contentment asks this question: when is enough enough? In our hearts, do we know when enough is enough? I don't know if we do. I don't know if it's maybe the older that you get, you become satisfied with what you have, and maybe when you're younger, there just isn't enough and you're always pushing towards it. I don't know, but for you, how do you know when enough is enough? I want to talk today, just briefly, about three enoughs. The three enoughs. And here's two of them: intake and output. When have we taken in enough? And when have we given enough? When I'm living my life and I'm trying to survive, it's so easy to get caught up in taking in. Do I have enough money? Do I have enough food? Am I satisfied with the luxuries that I have? And in this world, when I'm trying to survive, it's hard to know, when have I done enough? The outputs. When have I worked enough? When have I donated enough, given enough? At their extremes of intakes and outputs, for intakes, there is this consumerism. What's the next thing I need to buy? Oh, look at that shiny object. What do I need? And somehow taking in things gives us some feeling that we confuse with happiness. Or outputs, workaholism, ways of just never being satisfied. Let me pause there. I know that many of you are retired, and I know that many of you I know that so many of you, when your kids ask you, or your grandchildren ask you, what can I get you for Christmas? Truly your answer is, I have everything, just give me a stick of bubble gum and world peace. But are there ways that you're caught up in feeling that what you're taking in isn't enough? Or are you caught up in ways of thinking that what you're giving in the world just isn't enough? And are we doing it to anesthetize something about our lives? Some discontent in our lives. The third enough has to do with value. How much is this worth? You watch the what's it called, the road show, the antique road show, and it's just so enticing to see how much is this thing going to be worth, and you see the surprise on the owner's face